again, and welcome back to part 2 of chapter 9. More muscles, where we talk about actually how muscles work, not so much the physical parts, but actually how they work in conjunction with one another. Also, yes, the snake is still stuck down my shirt. This isn't the first time, and it won't be the last time. He does this sometimes. Although, right now he's napping in my armpit, so. The armpits are super warm, which is why he enjoys them so much. It's one of the warmest parts on my upper body, so he likes to go get stuck in that when he's feeling cold. Anyway, I don't know why. I'm not feeling that cold myself in the lab, and usually I am, so I'm not entirely sure why Monty's feeling so cold today, but I guess apparently he is. Well, the other half of him is up here. Or he's being shy. I'm not sure which. Anyway, enough about silly snakes. Let's go ahead and talk about silly muscles that we need, that are really important and stuff for everything. All right. Also, I love these horrible Photoshops. They're funny as all get out, if you ask me. There's that one guy on the internet that he actually, people like message him and say, hey, can you do this? Or couldn't he crop my boyfriend out? And he does he takes it to the extreme, explaining it. It's really funny. Excuse me. Yeah. But yeah, seems legit. So anyway, muscle contraction can be observed by removing a single skeletal muscle fiber and connecting it to a device that senses and records changes in the overall length in the muscle fiber. And we actually started doing this, not so much for science, but just for funsies. This actually is what inspired Mary Shelley to actually write Frankenstein, in the fact that she went to science kind of symposium. It was her dad was kind of an interesting dude. He'd take her at a young age to a lot of different weird stuff, exposed her to a lot of different stuff. And she did go to a symposium where they used to take, and some people still do it today, frog's legs and attach it to, something that can do electrical current, and all of a sudden the legs start jumping. Because technically what the muscles are using is electricity to work. It's just that, it's bioelectricity isn't necessarily the same thing as the electricity that we use to charge our phones and whatnot. So it's kind of interesting. But unfortunately, they also took that to the extreme, as they used to take corpses from criminals back then, because that was the only corpses you could get for science. To do any type of science was you had to get criminal corpses to do anatomy and physiology back in the day, which turned into body snatching, which is a whole nother story on itself, but we'll not go there yet. But interestingly enough, she went to this one symposium, and they actually used electricity to make the muscles in a dead guy flop around. Actually opened and closed his eyes and made his mouth do weird things. Like I said, they were just attaching him to electricity. He was dead, but it stayed with her, and that became some of the seeds that later became her novel, Frankenstein. So, yeah. So, muscle contraction is fascinating. Like I said, when we just removed a single thing, that's where we get a myogram, which is a single muscle twitch. And, however, back then they were just seeing what they could do by attaching, the dead guy up to a electrical device. Fun. Anyway, so eventually we got to science. Just took us a bit. Anyway, so threshold stimulus. This is the minimum strength of stimulation of a muscle fiber required to cause a contraction. So there is a minimum of energy or stimulation that we need to get this sucker to actually jump and actually contract. So remember, when we're talking about this, we've got the period of contraction. That's where the myosin is pulling on the actin and it's pulling it all together. And then you've got the period of relaxation, where the myosin lets go and the actin goes back to normal. So a twitch is the contractile response of a single muscle fiber to a single impulse. So again, what is that made up of? It's made up of three things: the latent period, the period of contraction, and the period of relaxation. So again, force of contraction versus time. X-axis is always time in science, for the most part. Anyway, so long story short, this is this myogram, or a single muscle twitch. All right, now the length of the muscle fiber before stimulation determines how much force it can develop. So optimum starting length is the resting length. You don't want to pull too far. You don't want to pull, you don't want to be squished in, which is why, in martial arts, there's the thing known as like the 6-inch punch, where it's like you're like 6 inches. But look how your arms all folded up. By some strange miracle, it's really hard to punch for only 6 inches and actually get a whole lot of force out of that. And that's somebody who's taken karate years and years and years, but although my body hasn't really. So yeah, you can't get, maximum damage out of your arm being smooshed up like this, which is where you see right here in a muscle length that's overly shortened, where the actin, which is this wide part right here, and the myosin, the thick part right here, is kind of smushed. There's nowhere for it to stretch or recoil even more. So it's already smushed together as is. So it's like, we're pulling, but we're already there, dude. So anyway, stretched muscle fibers develop less force, so it's overly stretched. And again, overly shortened, same problem. Again, the reason overly stretched is not so hot is because the myosin heads can't reach the binding sites on the actin. The actin's too far away, and they're like, So imagine, this is why it's really hard when you're on the edge of a cliff hanging by your fingertips to get back up, is because all of your muscles in your arms and everything are overly stretched because you're hanging on by your fingertips on the side of a cliff. And FYI, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't get stuck on the side of a cliff by just your fingertips. Unless you're one of those rock climber type peoples that like to do the freehand and stuff. But then even you probably know not to overstretch your arms. Anyway, and legs. So overly stretched doesn't give you optimal, you're fighting against yourself, basically. Not cool. Optimal length gives you optimal strength. And again, shortened muscle fibers develop less force. Since compressed, we can't shorten any further. So there you go. That's why the 6-inch, karate punch is like, You need that full range punch, man. Yeah, get it up in there. Get your hip involved too. Ladies, we have hips to throw good, strong punches. Because if you get your hip into it, you get more of your energy. Yeah. Anyway, just tips for you later. Now, summation. This is the process by which individual muscle fibers twitches combine. So this kind of goes back to like waves and stuff. If you've ever had some basic science and you've seen waves and whatnot, and if you put two sound waves together and they resonate, it makes a stronger, clearer wave. If they have interference where it's two different frequencies, then you're not going to get a very good, it sounds like that, and then you go, and then you tell them to turn off the noise. So anyway, where are you going? He is up in my shirt. Anyway, so this produces sustained contractions, which can lead to partial or complete tectonic contractions. Excuse me, I kept trying to say tectonic because I used to teach earth science too, and it's like, no, not tectonics. We're not land masses. Anyway, so again, this is why you do reps. Summation is actually really good because it also sometimes the slower you can do the rep actually gives the muscle a lot more exercise. So, going like this really fast, like, a lot of little kids like to do constantly because they think they're going to be like, yeah, I'm getting so strong. And it's actually, sometimes it's the slower motion where you're really getting that muscle working together. So again, we get those, those partial or complete contractions, and that gives you greater force given time. So exercise, it's good for your muscles and everything else. So let's talk about motor units. So a motor neuron plus all of the muscle fibers it connects to or it controls. So we have different ones. We have a whole muscle consists of many motor units. So we usually have more than one neuron going in, but sometimes one neuron commands a whole bunch of ones, and sometimes one neuron commands just a couple. And there's a reason for that. We have coarse movements that are produced with large numbers of fibers in a motor unit, which is kind of like, just kind of think like hulking out or something like that. Standing up, where you're basically using a whole bunch of guys to stand up. Whereas precise movements are produced with fewer fibers in a motor unit. So in other words, it's like precision, especially like with your fingers, and writing. That's very precise. So that way we can actually write, although, some people's handwriting are not that precise, but who cares? We're not going there. We're not going there right now. And, hold on, my brain train just left and derailed. It's coming back online. Oh, hold on. All right, so anyway, this is precise movements, only a couple of motor units per neuron. So that way I have very precise control so I can write on a piece of paper or whatnot. Whereas coarse is just like me picking up the cell phone. And then it goes to precise with me flicking up with my thumb and then, just doing whatever. So, coarse movements versus precise movements, which is, when we want to do something, a little bit finer than like, when we're trying to thread a needle versus, lifting a box. So that's why we have recruitment of motor units. And usually what we do is we recruit usually the smallest first up into the largest. So the smaller motor units get recruited first. Have you ever gone over to something to pick it up and find it's heavier than what you thought it was in your head? I think we've all done that. You walk over and you look at a box and you assume, oh, okay. And then you grab it and it's heavier than you thought. This isn't a good example of feeling those sustained contractions. So in other words, the smaller are recruited first because you think the box is heavier or is not as heavy as it looks, and you go, oh, I need more. And that's when you start recruiting the larger motor units so that way you can pick it up. So summation and recruitment produce sustained contractions of increasing strength, whole muscle contractions. And this makes everything we do very smooth, not jerky. Because if you've ever looked at like a lot of our robots that we've been trying to build lately and how they walk and everything, they're very, even right now, they're still very herky-jerky, even though they can do really amazing things. Look up, what's the name of the company? Something Dynamics. They're walking. Now they've got it to the point where it can do like almost like, have you ever watched those ninja TV shows? They're almost there, but still has to be attached to things. It's pretty impressive how far we've come from the first walking robots to what we've got now. It's insane. Look it up sometime. But they kind of move with a herky-jerky movement, whereas we have very smooth movements because of this recruitment of doing the small first up into the larger until we have it. So we're not doing the robot, which is hard to do with a snake down your shirt. But anyway, he's like, what are you doing, Mommy? Stop it. Anyway, so that's why we are not herky-jerky like a robot, because we have many, many different, motor units being recruited to do things. So that gives us muscle tone, which is a continuous state of partial contraction in resting muscles. So that we're constantly working it. Again, the more we work it, the more we've got it, the more we'll build more, and the more efficient it becomes. Yeah. On theory, and some of you probably know this better than me, and I'm just a flabby person sitting there saying these things. So there's different types of contractions. One is isotonic. So this is basically the muscle contracts and changes length equal force. So concentric basically is a shortening contraction. So if we're like lifting something, we're going, So this is concentric. So we're going up towards shortening, concentric. If we're lengthening a contraction, which we do have muscles that you work in different ways. We'll talk about that in the next lecture. So if I let the weight back down, that's a lengthening contraction, and that's eccentric. So concentric, eccentric. Concentric, eccentric. Now, if we grab something and the muscle contracts and it does not change length, and there's no change in force, really, it's isometric. So in other words, you grab onto something and you hold on for dear life. That would be isometric. If somebody blows the airlock bay to blow an evil alien xenomorph out the airlock doors, and you're holding on because all the air's getting sucked out in the movies that I just happen to be mentioning because I like sci-fi movies. Yeah, and then you close it, and yeah, you're holding on for dear life. That would be isometric. There's no movement, but gosh darn, you're going to hold on to that thing. Anyway, so that would be isometric. So again, this is up is concentric, isotonic concentric. This is isotonic eccentric, moving down and grabbing on and holding. That would be isometric. Cool? All right. So let's talk about how smooth muscles differ for this. So again, compared to skeletal muscles, smooth muscle fibers are shorter. Single centrally located nucleus, as you can see right here. A lot of these guys are organ linings. You're going to see this in your stomach, all the way down from your mouth, all the way down to your rear end, your anus. Your whole alimentary canal or digestive tract is pretty much made of smooth muscle to move everything through. Because, we don't want it all sitting around just for funs and giggles. We need it moving. Anyway, so elongated with tapering ends. When it's relaxed, it just looks like, tapered ends. When it's contracted, it looks like it's all bundled up. Myofilaments are randomly organized. It does not need to be as organized as a skeletal muscle cell. It's because these guys, do a lot of work. These guys, they do the wave. They lack striations, they don't have the transverse tubules like I was showing you, and the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it does have it, but it's not very well developed. It's nothing like in your muscles, in your skeletal muscle cells, excuse me. But that's because these guys don't need to do forced constant, heavy lifting or anything like that. What they're doing is they're just doing smooth contractions in a wave pattern. It's called peristalsis. There you go. I gave you a word for next semester, peristalsis. That's when you swallow and it starts moving in a wave of contraction down and forcing the food into your stomach. And then from your stomach out into your small intestines, and then from your small intestines to your large intestines, and then hopefully into the toilet. So that's why these guys they're not doing the heavy lifting. They're just moving things in a wave. So that way, things get moved around, but nothing like, us needing to lift, a whole box of bones over there. Anyway, so 2 types of smooths. So there's a multi-unit, which is basically where a whole bunch, each muscle has its own neuron. And they're less organized. They function as separate units. Fibers function independently. And the only places you really find these are in the iris of your eye and the walls of your blood vessels. So that way when you dilate and, contract, when your eyeballs do that thing, when you get a bright light in it, you go, or, you're checking for dilation with the little light pen thing. That's actually a multi-unit smooth muscle. So we have finerness because they each have their own nerve endings. So that way we have finer control over dilation and relaxation in our irises and in the walls of our blood vessels. Now, this is stimulated by neurons and hormones. The other part is usually the one that's pretty much found everywhere else, is the single unit smooth muscle. So a single unit smooth muscle responds as a unit. As you can see, the nerve fiber comes in, and he actually has kind of an elongated part instead of one for each cell, or there's one that goes through and it has these little varicosities that extend it, so that way these all work in one unit. So it's kind of like when, watching people on a rowboat and you go, row, row, row. It's kind of like that. So responds to the unit, sheets of spindle-shaped muscle fibers held together by gap junctions. Remember we talked about gap junctions. They have rhythmicity, so that again, conduct peristalsis. What I said is that wave contraction. Like when you swallow, it starts the wave contraction that's involuntary and it brings the food down into your stomach. That's called peristalsis. Walls of most hollow organs. The most common type of smooth muscle is this right here. So we've got multi-unit, which you find in the iris, walls of blood vessels, and the smooth single unit, which is pretty much everywhere else. That's lines most of your muscles and whatnot. So anyway. So, resembles muscle contraction in these ways. It still has an interaction between actin and myosin. Again, calcium ATP calcium to get the tropomyosin out of the actin's face, and ATP to get the myosin unbound and then ready to go again. Both are triggered by membrane impulses. So that's basically what's the same. What's different? Smooth muscle lacks troponin, so cadumolin is instead. So the guy that's hanging out in the way of these two, actin and myosin, is not troponin, it's cadumolin. Same thing, different words. Anyway, so two neurotransmitters affect the smooth muscle, acetylcholine and norepinephrine, which is basically adrenaline. Hormones can stimulate or inhibit smooth muscle contraction. So like we're going to talk about this later when we talk about the differences between your sympathetic nervous system and your asympathetic nervous system when you're talking about fight or flight response or rest and digest, because this can actually shut down your digestive system. If you're in fight or flight mode and you think zombies are coming to get you, you're not thinking about, gee, I'm hungry. Should I go eat a banana or a cheeseburger? It is the last thing on your mind because you're in fight or flight mode and your digestive system actually kind of shuts down. So that way you've got more energy going to your legs and your arms and getting away from the danger than or fighting off the danger than you are thinking about cheeseburgers. You know what I mean? So again, we're going to talk more about that when we talk about parasympathetic and sympathetic and all that fun jazz when we talk about the nervous system. So stretching can trigger smooth muscle contraction. Smooth muscle slower to contract and relax. Again, because he's not doing heavy lifting, he doesn't have to really worry about going fast. Smooth muscle, more resistant to fatigue because, again, it's not doing crazy heavy things. It's just moving our organs around. So smooth muscle can change the length without changing the tautness, which is actually kind of an interesting trick he can do. All right, now cardiac muscle. Again, we're going to talk a lot about him next semester as well, so we get a double dipping in him. So it's located only in the heart. Striated muscle cells, again, they're branched all over the place because this guy has to literally act as a unit. And they're actually really interestingly triggered. We'll go over that next semester. Muscle fibers are joined together by intercalculated discs because they're, again, remember if you go back to what an intercalculated disc, it's basically a cool gap junction because all these muscle cells need to act as one unit to get that uniform pumping that our heart does, the lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. So to do that, instead of having a boundary between each cell, they have those intercalculated discs, which lets everything move through freely, so all those separate cells act as one. And they have network fibers known as a syncytium, and they're self-exciting and rhythmic, which is good. And the longer refractory period than skeletal muscles, and there's no sustained or tectonic contractions, though, because, again, this guy is pumping. He's not for, like, picking up boxes, although he's definitely pumping to get all the oxygen around to pick up the boxes. Again, he goes into all of this himself in Crash Course, because it's always useful. And with that, we have come to the end of part 2 of this lecture on chapter 9 and the muscles. So I'll see you in part 3 in just a moment. Bye!